these images of people donning feathers and putting on things because they are connecting with a culture, because this is what they're learning. And it's so beautiful for them to have that exposure. And at the end of the day, we are all indigenous to some place. We are not separate from any other person. Though ritual is universal, and even the sitting around the circle around a fire, everyone since the beginning of time has been able to do that. What I also teach is how we can instill this curiosity to uncover and create your own ritual, your own practice of presence. Everyone has their own different way of doing things.
Hi, I'm Alex. Welcome to Voices of Emergence, where inner transformation meets systemic regeneration. In each episode, we journey with courageous thinkers, creators, and system shifters who are reimagining leadership, business, and community from the ground of consciousness and care. How do we evolve beyond extractive systems? And how do we tend the literal and symbolic soil of lives in service to Earth and one another? Join us as we reclaim the wisdom of the body and step into a living story of emergence, integration, and possibility. I'm joined today by my dear friend and co-host, Rudy De Waele. I admire most is the way he listens, not just with his ears, but with his whole being. He brings people together with care and clarity, holding space at the intersection of innovation, inner work, and cultural renewal. So, hi, Rudy.
Hi, Alex. Thank you for this lovely introduction. And today we welcome Amánda Efthimiou. Do I pronounce that correctly, Amánda?
Yes, you did.
Okay, so Amánda is a keynote speaker, integration facilitator, and systems thinker, working at the intersection of health, technology, and consciousness. As the founder of INTEGRA, she leads interdisciplinary projects that blend neuroscience, nature-based intelligence, and inner development to guide transformational work with leaders, startups, and mission-driven teams. With a background in neuroscience and years of collaboration with indigenous communities in the Amazon, Amánda brings a rare synthesis of scientific rigor, embodied wisdom, and regenerative insight. So welcome, Amánda.
Thank you.
Yeah, the first question I want to ask is like, when you hear the word emergence, what images or sensations arise within you?
Emergence feels natural. So a sensation that is natural in my body, actually. Feeling of an unfolding. It's almost like the emergence is a great mystery that comes up naturally. That's what comes to me when I hear that word. The sensation is actually quite grounding, if I were to give it a more embodied characteristic.
That's wonderful. You know, I am a mix of cultures myself as a Brazilian Finn, and you're a mix of cultures as a Brazilian Greek. So can you tell us more about your story and how that has affected you? And how do you feel being between places and cultures? Do you long for your cultures, and how do you integrate all of this?
Oh, thank you for the question. I also want to say how much I loved this introduction you have to this podcast. All these words around integrity and integration are just my love languages. So I'm excited for the conversation. A bit about my background. So I am a third culture kid, as you can call it, someone who was raised in New York to Brazilian and Greek parents. And I've long been a student of life from the beginning. I've been someone who's traveled extensively from an early age to get to know different cultures and the way culture actually affects all things that happen in society. And culture and language is part of that culture. So language is very important to me. And the words that we use and how we use them are also very important across culture and in different languages. I've been on a very interesting personal development journey that has led me to what I'm doing currently for individuals and for companies. Someone who has long been advocating for and interested in mental health. I myself have gone through my own mental health and healing journey from an early age. I went through a very traditional medical system of healing my mental health and mental illness. I was suffering from anxiety as a teenager. And what helped me come out of that was actually plant-based medicines, psychedelic healing. And that opened a big door to seeing the world in a very different way, in a way to sort of take that autonomy and control back to my own self, my own body, my own healing process, and to do so in a very multidisciplinary way. So I was exposing myself to many different modalities of healing with plant medicines, but also embodied healing practices, meditation, connecting with different cultures that have a strong spiritual connection, and also to nature, to the natural world as my greatest healer and teacher. And so that gave me a lot of context and awareness in how I can actually start conversations with others to support their healing process. By no means did I have any answers like, okay, you know, you're suffering from something here, take a psychedelic medicine and that's going to fix you. That is not at all the uncovering and sort of the exploration I was on. I was really interested in how we integrate all the different modalities for our inner world and how we can actually support ourselves in that process. So while I was going through my own healing journey, I decided I wanted to return to university to study what was actually happening to me when I was working with these plant-based medicines. And that's when I did a neuroscience degree focusing on the effects of fungi medicine, psilocybin, together with psychotherapy for mental health outcomes. And I started to understand that neuroscience and the sciences, we have some answers, we have some understanding, but not all of it. And throughout my career, I've worked in the VC space, with early stage startups, in the nonprofit sector, and always in this area of well-being, regeneration, and how we can mix the sciences with the natural intelligences that we have. And that kind of really just spun out of my own personal desire to understand the human condition a little bit better and how to bridge that to supporting others in a more systemic way in the area of business. So that's a little bit of fast story.
Very interesting journey, Amanda. Thank you for sharing. So I wonder, like, what were or perhaps if you want to dig deeper a little bit in that, like, were there any cathartic moments or like moments that were, you got like really deep insights, or that actually where you decided to take action? Okay, I'm going to move in that space, or I'm going to work in that space, or move in that direction. Outside of basically your academic background, you went back to study, which is also an interesting part. And then also, how did nature come into that as an important part in that journey and the path that you designed for yourself? Can you say a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So when asked like if there was this particular moment, a very specific catharsis, it's funny because my answer is also a reflection of how I see sort of the philosophy of these emergent properties of healing and transformation. It's this slow, natural, organic unfolding, genuine, because it was actually an accumulation of different experiences. And one day my body, this human body I have, is like, okay, what can I possibly do with all of these inputs and these insights? I need to make sense of this for myself. And that takes a lot of inner excavation, a bit of the shadow work, a bit of just talking with others, sharing the experience. So you're right. I went back to university because I wanted to find a way and a lens to make sense of something that happened to me. I also made an intentional effort to explore different perspectives of an industry that was emerging, specifically the psychedelic industry at the time when I joined this VC firm. What are the different avenues for approaching a singular problem or phenomena? So I looked at it from a neuroscientific perspective. I looked at it from a highly business transactional perspective. What does it look like to invest capital into an infrastructure for psychedelic care? What does that ecosystem look like from a regulatory perspective? I looked at it from the perspective of philanthropy, reciprocity, nature-based wisdom, and indigenous traditions. by directing this nonprofit called El Puente Foundation, which is supporting biocultural conservation and forest regeneration of indigenous-owned territories in the Amazon basin in Brazil. And these specific indigenous communities are stewards of sacred plant medicines and natural intelligences. So I, over the years, decided, okay, what do I do about something? How do I integrate this profound personal experience? It's to integrate myself into diverse systems of knowledge, of care, of doing, in order to find my own way. And that's when I decided to immerse myself in all these areas to then come up with my own perspective and way of applying that for others. And in terms of the way nature plays that role, it's been that common thread for me, because whenever I'm in doubt and I don't understand a way to approach a problem, I look to the systems of the natural world, which is us. We are inherently that natural phenomena, of course. We are not separate from. So if I look to what might be cues from the outside that are easier to understand, I can then inform how I make a decision. And I learned a lot of that in the forest. So I guess if there are some moments of peak understanding and integration, it would be with communities that are living and breathing this integration with nature every single day. And that was my biggest inspiration.
It's extraordinary how you bring different fields of knowledge and integrate them. I feel that through my own multicultural experience and the experience of living in different countries. By the age of 11, I had lived in 6 cities on 5 continents and spoke 5 languages. And I think one of the things that kind of experience does to you is you have an open mind to new cultures, new tastes, new ways of thinking. You have to adapt and be flexible to new people. I had to make new friends in the new schools. And so it's all different kinds of information coming in at a young age and then trying to make sense of it and integrate it. And it feels like you're doing the same kind of thing. And especially your background in neuroscience is pretty unique because you have the neuroscience, but you have the indigenous and all these other modalities as well. I'm curious, how has the neuroscience helped you in your journey? And more specifically, the default mode network. Do you believe this is where the ego lies, is in the default mode network? And how does this relate to your understanding of reality, like a symbolic understanding of reality? So it's not just a material reality, but there's like consciousness going on all around us.
Okay, love this. Okay. So the first question was around how neuroscience has shaped my work, right? So my background in neuroscience was really I'm interested in languages and story and how different forms of perspective shape a particular problem or trend or phenomena. And for me, before working, going and doing research, I understood from an embodied place, like what these big peak moments, what nature intelligence, what plant medicine can do for me and what I see in others. And I value that. I wanted to understand what was actually going on. If there was a way for me to get a clearer picture by doing research, by essentially going and digging through all the literature that existed in this area of integrating fungi medicine with psychotherapy. What are the changes that are happening in the brain? Have we done enough research? Is there still more to do? And how that's more informed me more than anything was actually how to listen to, read, and understand critically a very scientific perspective that essentially says the same thing as the other perspectives. What I basically learned is that we're all saying the same thing in a different language. And as you say, you learned all these languages before the age of 11 or 5 languages before an early age. And I do believe that that's the key for regeneration and for emergence, is understanding different languages, not literal languages, perhaps spoken languages, but frameworks and vocabulary for synthesizing and analyzing a particular problem. So that's actually, of all things how neuroscience has actually helped my work. I am not doing research anymore. I did do a synthesis of music, basically a comparative analysis of indigenous-based music traditions that evoke certain trance-like states or spiritual healing music like Icaros during ayahuasca ceremonies in Peru, and how that compares with more generative music created in clinical settings for psychedelic assisted therapy in a clinical realm, and how we can make sense of the two. So I also have this more like, a bit more geeking out on that area, but more broadly, how I use it in my day-to-day is actually more just for us to shape our conversations. Now, that area of the default mode network, which is so interesting because it's kind of become famous in my world, of consciousness, of altered states, psychedelic healing, all these everyone's talking about the default mode network, how it becomes disrupted. They say in the beginning, they would say it was actually reduction in the default mode network, but that's not actually the case. It's within the default mode network, you see a reduction in process, but between networks is an increase because there's actually an increase in synaptic transmission and conversation between brain regions. It's very important. But obviously, when we're in a peak state or we're activating certain serotonin receptors with psychedelics, for example, we have a change in the default mode network, which is the seat of the ego, that site of rumination of the I, these processes that when we're actually in a depressed state or anxiety, we are hyperactive in that realm. And to calm it down actually allows us to get bigger, to think bigger, to go beyond that individual identity, right? We identify so much and then we get caught. And so that's a little bit of that. To come to the idea of whether in the non-material, right? I think your question is around the non-materiality of the default mode network.
Yes, and it occurs to me, and I know it was a big question, but I'm so excited that you're here to talk about this. When the default mode network reduces, there is this greater connectivity, and I'm wondering whether that's what opens up to the symbolic reality of the world. In other words, we move away from strict materialism into more of a oneness or idealism, like non-duality.
Yeah, like unity. If you talk to most neuroscientists or other researchers in this realm that are very much materialist, they would not agree with this. I was recently in New York at a what is consciousness kind of panel, huge conversation between materialists, physicists, researchers, and Zen Buddhists. The differences in the answer is very profound. From my perspective now, I believe that has a part to play. I don't believe that is the sort of trigger point or opening for any form of the mind to conceive of unity consciousness and non-duality. It's a supportive system. However, if we just stick with the default mode network, then we're also just sticking with the mind as the primary vehicle for achieving that kind of consciousness relationship. I believe consciousness is much bigger than what can be described through a mind-based process. It is, for me, more energetic, more spiritual. It is tangible, even if we can get to our sensitivity in our body to be able to touch consciousness in a way, in the natural realm. So yes, it's one of the many parts of what can be conceived of as a tool for or a gateway to this non-duality, though I would by no means limit it to that place.
Yes, I love the way where this is going, because I think this is also the whole living system that we are in, from the academic world, the research, neuroscience, quantum physics, to, what we can achieve with consciousness or tapping into consciousness, and then also the world of the indigenous wisdom that have been carrying this type of wisdom, including somatic wisdom that we took over from the Indian culture and all that. But what I want to go to is also, you work with ritual, right? Or you work a lot with ritual in your work, and the importance of ritual, because in my own journey also, I think what changed for me was literally to sit in circles and in ceremony with indigenous people. and the way they are so connected with nature and to the higher realm or whatever we call it, it feels so natural. It's something that we have basically forgotten because we were fully immersed in the scientific world and the data world. And I think technology is accelerating even that limitation for us. And so I also believe a lot in the importance of ritual. So what I want to hear, like, how do you include ritual in your work, and also especially to the business and entrepreneurial work or startup world and all that?
Oh, I love talking about this. Thank you for bringing it up, Rudy. Ritual is, for me, a way for us to remember. It brings the sacred back to our very sacred life that we often, at least for me, forget. It's so easy to forget who we are, and the simplicity of what rituals can provide. It doesn't have to be this very esoteric, inaccessible practice. Rituals are our right to have, and they've been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And I knew of this, but it really did become embodied and integrated for me when I also spent, like you, spent time with communities that sit in circle. The circle is one of the most powerful shapes for community, for regeneration, for emergence, all of these beautiful words and practices that we care about. And ritual for me is a way to remember that part of us and that connection that we have, not just to the environment, the current reality, but to our ancestry, to our origin. Big part of what I've learned and what I think is important, especially as we're looking at technology and how we integrate new technologies like AI into the future of business and of work, is to remember our origins, where we come from, to remember that we, in rituals that honor ancestors, that call in people that are no longer here, if we don't actively practice the fact that we've come from a place and from other human beings that have paved the way for us to do what we're doing now, it is a disservice to our future as ancestors of the future. So we carry on a lineage and a line in order to make this world a better place, because that is what we all as humans are trying to achieve. And so I believe that it's about also a remembrance of origin, and to bring presence to that and to our physical body in any given moment. So I've actually lit a candle before our call. So I have a candle right here next to me. Very simple ritual, right? Working with the elements. So how I bring this to my clients. We are talking about the elements of nature, right? Water, earth, air, fire, and the fifth element. These elements make up everything, right? And so rituals that I've learned can be simple ways of acknowledging and activating particular elements in a particular moment in time. So I have fire here as a candle because we are talking about ideas, we're igniting. I'm here on a podcast with you. I want to make sure that what I say is coming from this place of deep wisdom that is ignited by this fire, this passion of what it is that I want to share. What I bring a lot to are rituals that also help professionals, especially within climate advocacy and in the climate sector, people who are really focused on how we can make the earth a better place for us all, is to bring back gratitude and awareness for different elements like water. So water ritual. Before drinking your first cup of water in the morning, to sit with it and to acknowledge that this water gives you life, this water is precious, and to have a brief moment, just a brief moment of pause before drinking the water, to bring attention and presence. And so rituals can also look simple from the outside, but when done with intention, they completely transform. Being outside, taking deep presence and paying attention to, let's say, your tree or an element of nature that you see every day in your neighborhood, so that you can watch it as the season goes by. You can see how it changes. That is also a ritual of presence. of specific observation of an entity that has a natural cycle that you are part of and that you observe. That wires a couple of little things in the brain to then make you see and open up more perspectives to other parts. And then you start to hear more clearly the sounds of the birds outside, which you bring your presence and attention to. Rituals can be that kind of more dynamic in nature, right? Although I like to circulate them around the elements, because that is something we are all part of and that we can all understand, and it's all universal. For me, the most important part of rituals is their universality. You don't need to be, I think I come from, at least in my days working with this, psychedelic ecosystem, we are unaware of how we can make sense of all this history. So we attach to other cultures and we start to, even if it's unconsciously, appropriate other cultures, other stories, other traditions. You see the famous, these images of people donning feathers and putting on things because they are connecting with a culture, because this is what they're learning. And it's so beautiful for them to have that exposure. And at the end of the day, we are all indigenous to some place. We are not separate from any other person. Though ritual is universal, and even the sitting around the circle around a fire, everyone since the beginning of time has been able to do that. And so really about connecting to the universal principles that connect us and guide us, and to help people to have a way. What I also teach is how we can instill this curiosity to uncover and create your own ritual, your own practice of presence. Everyone has their own different way of doing things. My candle lighting doesn't have to work for everybody, right? It can be another form, a morning practice, something a little bit more dynamic, a meditation and a journaling, whatever it might be that brings people to that state of connection with themselves and, of course, something larger than themselves.
Beautiful description. You bridge worlds. You're like a bridge between different worlds, between the scientific with your neuroscience and the mythopoetic or the symbolic with these elements and objects like the fire and water and feathers and the rituals. And so you bring both together and you see how one affects the other. Carl Jung, 100 years ago, he was facing something similar. He had the scientific background as a psychologist, which at that time he was trying to make into real science, like Sigmund Freud. It was a very respectable scientific endeavor to figure out psychology. But Jung himself had this whole mythical world that he didn't show to the world at the time because he was trying to be so serious. So he put it all into the Red Book, which was published like 60, 70 years after he died. And when you open the Red Book, it's like, wow, all the images and his dreams and everything he wrote in there is all symbolic. It's all mythopoetic. That all has this other meaning, which psychologists are still discovering today. And so it's so interesting how bridging these different worlds is kind of a challenge, because everyone wants to be rational and scientific, but there's this whole other understanding of the world that you just described, which I think is beautiful. So my question is, how do you see any myths or archetypes that are emerging now in this moment of incredible change in the world? Do you see any kind of new archetypes that are coming through or new myths? And how does this affect our relationship with AI? You brought up AI, and can we bring this level of understanding to our interactions with AI as well?
Oh, the myths and archetypes that are coming. I love Carl Jung, and his Red Book is fascinating. So great that you brought it up. And, he really paved the way. And I feel that now people today who are in the sciences, or, who are, let's say, in psychology or the harder sciences, can feel more free to make these bridges. The archetype that I see that's coming, this is a tough question. The first one, I will come with what has come intuitively, although maybe there's another one that will come after. I do believe that the hero's journey is being reimagined in this current sort of paradigm that we're in currently. And specifically the relationship with sort of our masculine, the hero's journey for me is an inherently masculine sort of storyline. And what's really arising now is this emergence of the feminine, and not the female, but the feminine. And that as a sort of a carrier of knowledge and who's sort of been holding down the space for a long time and hasn't really been given that air to breathe and to emerge and to really occupy its fullest power. And so this feminine sort of archetype that can counterbalance all this journey that's going on. We need to go through the muck and the shadow and come out. But the feminine does it with a little bit more grace and poise and with nature as sort of the guide, as opposed to maybe a more mind and cognitive process, but more embodied. We've been talking about embodiment. And it's also, I believe, an archetype of, the feminine is giving permission for other perspectives to come. So we've been sort of, and I will truthfully say a big part of why I wanted to return to and study the sciences is because I thought that my ability to speak about these subjects would be taken with more credibility and seriousness if I also did the research, if I also went into that sort of masculine paradigm and and was able to focus fully on the mind. So the feminine is integrating all the pieces together to make whole. And it carries it with a lot more capacity and for chaos and for mystery and for unknown. And so tech with AI is a series of processes of unknowns. And we are literally every day seeing what comes through from a lot of these emergent technologies. The feminine is more comfortable with this unknown, with the mystery. And I'm seeing more of this now. We are learning how to become more aware of and attuned to an unfolding that we cannot control. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of what's coming through to answer your question.
Wow, this brings us exactly where I wanted to go next. So this is a perfect flow. Yeah, there's a lot to say about the feminine and the masculine. And I think you also do work with the feminine or feminine leadership and circles or women's circles. I do a lot of work, and Alex as well, with men circles. And I think they are, each part or each work has their meaning, because men, they need to sit together with men to get rid of their shame and their guilt and to actually learn to trust again the other man, because we are in a paradigm, or we are in a belief system that we cannot trust the other man. While for women are a lot more open and a lot more embracing. And as you say, I really like that the feminine gives permission now for other worlds to emerge. And I also feel that, there's a lot of work done separately, for men and women, but there's also a need to actually come together again, that we can learn from each other. And I think especially in leadership, because what we see, or what at least that's my experience in the business world, we see a lot of feminine, or let's say women that have a lot of masculine energy.
Yeah.
They express that masculine energy. While, part of the evolution is that the feminine needs to return to, its natural feminine energy, also to give that space for the masculine to come back to its own form of healthy masculinity or divine masculine, or whatever you want to call it. But both need each other to reinforce each other. I also feel I came to a point in my man's work that I really want to invite the feminine again, because without the feminine, the man kind of stays stuck in their own masculinity, or, without the feminine, it is not inspired. I wanted to know from you on feminine leadership. How do you live that feminine leadership? And you work a lot on cyclicality, especially in a linear world, an extractive world. Like, how does that feel? How does that work? And how do you integrate that? Like the seasonal, cyclical, gestural, rather than the goal-driven, very linear type of dimensions that we are in. So And how do you bring that forth in your work, and especially for female leadership? And how do you see that together with the masculine leadership that needs to co-evolve?
Yeah, I will say, depending on the context and the type of industry and where I'm at in the world, it can have different levels of challenge to really feel the full permission to embody this feminine leadership in this current paradigm we are evolving. It's interesting. For what I'm seeing is there are some spaces that are at different levels of acceptance and awareness of this evolving nature of leadership. There are some rooms I walk into in business and I'm like, wow, there's a long way to go. How do I do my small little part in a space where it's just masculine, in the sense that, look, there's decades and decades of a system that has worked to a point for now, and things have gotten done and there's been a lot of success. So how do you even approach a group that is feeling and thinking in this way? And then all of a sudden you have a woman who has done so well in that paradigm, in that way, and to say, oh, well, that A-type, that boss type woman, now, she doesn't even know how to approach coming back to a bit more of that energy that's actually much more powerful, but that's been suppressed, right? How do we even begin to approach? If I had like the magic solution, I would love to share it with you all. But what I find to be the most interesting in these spaces is finding universalities and commonalities. Where do we all agree or see the truth? What parts of our own lives and how we do business and how we carry ourselves are we the same? Because we are also focused on differences, and the differences are there, but we are whole. As if we are truly integrated, we have both the masculine and feminine inside of us. Everyone. We just find each other's common ground. So more often than not in these spaces, it's about more awareness to the feminine, because the masculine's already quite developed. And what does that look like? That looks like gently integrating in a very accessible way practices that get all men and women to look at their feminine in the workplace. It starts with a little bit more of the contemplative, like putting presence before a meeting, like a few breaths before starting, asking everyone to close their eyes and to come and tap into their body for a quick moment. That's just a small moment of bringing presence to the body, to their attention. I've done a lot of workshops, especially in gathering spaces, conferences that are usually with tons of talks, panels. It's very cognitive in nature. But then there's that moment of integration, which I love, that is starting to become more of like the feminine point, where we connect. We look at each other's eyes. Eye gazing is a very, very intimate thing, but when done, a lot of respect and care, you can really get to the universal truth of the other. And that, for me, evokes deep presence and awareness of the other person's being. And so you stop seeing the other person as a sort of an adversary, but as the same. For me, those are like slight, subtle forms of integrating the feminine. Now, for women, in terms of leadership, you mentioned like cycles. Obviously, we have different cycles than men. We operate on a 28-day cycle, approximately. We are not in the circadian solar cycle. I help women show that there's parts of their cycle where they're obviously in a phase when they're menstruating, when they shouldn't be taking on big calls or doing big meetings, and they could be resting and taking care of themselves. That's obviously an ideal situation, but I gave a TEDx talk in Berlin last year. I was bleeding that day. Was I supposed to say, oh, I need to take care of myself, I'm going to cancel this huge opportunity for me to go on stage? And there I had to do it anyway. Fortunately or unfortunately, we still need to operate and to be sometimes public speaking, doing a podcast, when we're in a phase of our life where maybe it's not ideal. So I believe feminine leadership is teaching not just those are parts of the cycle where it's important to be a certain way, but to also give ourselves a little more softness and permission to be okay with just having to do what we need to do and not putting so much pressure on the fact that it should be this way and it's that way. To be more comfortable, I believe this type of leadership is, I've said it before, comfortable with the chaos, the unknown, the inability to control what happens. We are not in control. Truly, I believe that. And the more we are allowing life to pass through us and to surrender to it, this idea of surrendering is a more feminine concept. It could profoundly change how we see the world. I don't know if you know the book or the author Michael Singer. You heard of the Surrender Experiment? I just I'm rereading it now. I just almost finishing it. I love this book. This is an incredible story of a man who has achieved so much success, who's completely surrendered to his life. And I believe that that, in a way, is an activation of a feminine principle of the powers that be will happen. And it doesn't change or lower the quality of your work. It doesn't mean that you have less value in a boardroom when you have something to say, but it's really a different way of approaching a situation. You also, I think Alex mentioned that Rudy is a very good listener. I will bring listening to this. Big part of leadership, what I see, is the capacity to listen and to instill in both men and women that feminine aspect of listening, deep listening. I don't know how many books tell us that the best leaders are the ones that listen more than they speak. There is a truth to that. There is a way to that. That's something we learn with indigenous communities. The most powerful spiritual elder leader in that room, in that circle, is the one who says very little. He's there to hold that space, to be attuned to everybody. And so whatever is spoken is very strong, very articulate, and resonant. And so a way to balance like the loudest voices in the room, especially with in VC, like this need to speak louder and to speak on top of one another, make sure we have the last word. And instead, and I've suffered from this myself, I would try and match that frequency. And that doesn't work for truly embodied feminine leadership. That's not what I've seen effective.
I love how you speak about that and how concrete it is when you speak about the feminine archetype coming into the world, like how it actually really means certain things. And you speak about it so beautifully. Sometimes I find that talking with men about the feminine, there's resistance. And it's like, no, we have to be men in the world. And so we cannot. So I find that finding another type of language to talk about it is more productive, like more of a structural language, like talking about compression versus expansion, you know? And so like there are times in life where we have to kind of compress, we have to control, we have to be very rational, we have to dominate, you know, we have to go out and do things. But sometimes it's a cycle, and sometimes it's a cycle of expansion, of creativity, of intuition, of allowing things to happen, of receiving. And actually receiving is its own type of strength. It's not about going out and doing and dominating, but it's about being open to just being and receiving what happens. And so getting away from the masculine feminine duality, which is difficult for some and is very gendered, to talking about it in different vocabulary to get at the same thing. Since we're close to the end here, I wanted to get your views on AI and consciousness. And, you know, what is the relationship between the evolution of AI, which is very rapid, and consciousness? Can it help our spiritual development? What is the role of AI? Are we getting into relationships with ChatGPT? And what is happening in this field?
AI, technology in general, and especially AI, it's a reflection of our collective consciousness, I believe. It's a mirror. It's accelerating, but it's a mirror of what is happening in and around us. And so it reflects what we value, what we fear, what we ignore, what we want to create. I've worked in spaces where AI is shaping health outcomes. I've been working with a company using AI to support for example, therapists and coaches with their clients that are undergoing big peak transformational processes, decision-making processes. AI, I actually am very positive about AI and what it can do for us. But I do believe it comes with a lot of responsibility and care. From an ethical perspective, what we do with AI is based on our consciousness, and the inputs that we put into it is how it will be received in all the systems that are being created from that AI. I'll give a story. There's a woman who I've met a few times on this organization called the House of Beautiful Business. Her name is Wakani Hoffman. She's an indigenous knowledge scholar from Kenya. And her work is actually very much to bridge and distill indigenous values and ethics and embed them into AI systems so we can increase intercultural literacy. So one story, I think she mentioned at a conference recently, similar to this. This is how I received it. You know, you ask an AI currently, oh, my fence bordering my neighbor's house is broken. What do I do? And then a traditional chat will come out and say, first, call a lawyer, right? Then, make sure that you get all the documentation, the photos, you get everything fixed, you get your insurance company. There's a lot of process, of course, to get your fence fixed. And then towards the end, it's like, then you talk to your neighbor and you tell them, that we need to get this fixed because the lawyer, they broke the law, whatever. And then there's a system that she's been training with this group, more of an indigenous base, through some of the values from these communities that she knows in Africa. And the first answer is like, call your neighbor. The same question is posed, but the response is, call your neighbor, go over to their home, have a conversation, right? Like a very different way of approaching the same problem. The very last thing you do in that list was to take any form of outside action that would require hostility, informing, this more of a transactional, aggressive way. So it's just to explain. I'd just like to share that story because I do believe that our consciousness is very much related to how AI is going to continue to shape how we see the world. And it's important that we embrace multiple perspectives to inform the technology. If we treat this AI with the same level of high consciousness that we want to see in our society, it will do us that, but only if we do it in that way. And we need to remember that the AIs are being trained by specific groups of people with higher amounts of resources at this moment in time. And so we need to make an extra effort to balance the scales to make sure that these types of stories, worldviews, languages, literal languages are coded to this technology so that it doesn't get lost, and that people in the future who are literally learning with AI can also learn all about these perspectives in a more general and balanced way.
Yeah, good points, Amanda. I'm also running a group on AI in the work where we actually work with men that are using AI actually as a personal growth tool and shadow work tool. And it's very interesting because half of the group is actually working with AI, the other half is not working with AI. But then every time also we check with the collective intelligence of the group and the circle, and then AI hasn't matched that intelligence yet. So, but yeah, I also asked the question, like, who's behind the AI, and I think that's a very important question, and that we need to, be very aware of like what is created and what is the source of the AI in the future. But I also believe at some point that some of my, AI can hallucinate. Some of my hallucinations is that, AI is now already, as a lot of students are using AI for their works and their theses. A professor told me that I think it's 60% already of students using AI, but like more than they are allowed to do. They recognize that it's used more than the quota that they allow, which is 20% or something. But they haven't found a real method yet to see how they're going to move forward with that. But the vision is also that at a certain point, these AIs are talking to each other. And all these AIs start talking to each other. And then what is the role of the human then, in our intelligence or how that is going to develop. So I also believe that at a certain point that there will be an intuition from humanity, and I truly hope so also, that we're going to return to our own intuitive intelligence, and our own intelligence of, body, the mind, the spirit, the heart, the soul. I also believe that, together we can come to probably the next paradigm shift that is emerging already in our networks, in our communities, but we don't often see this in the world right now. I think now we are facing the shadow, a huge shadow that has been accelerated by the algorithms that we haven't been, especially the masculine has been dealing with for, you mentioned decades, but it's centuries basically. Yeah. And that now it's like, I think it was in another podcast that we did, was it with Giles Hutchings, Alex, that he mentioned, it's a huge rites of passage that we are going through as a humanity. But my question before we go to the end was like, what is the role of community to you in all this development of like, where are we evolving as humanity, with leadership, with entrepreneurs, with startups that are working in technology, and the role of community and, sitting together?
I believe community is needed now more than ever before. We are in a really critical state of a shadow around our relationship with technology and community. When we have one another, we have more nodes of data to understand and to remember who we are. If we only have our own lives in our own rooms, we don't have the opportunities for the mirror in the other to reflect back our own inner nature. And community helps us accelerate that and do that. And the more people, human bodies and intuitive beings, creative beings that are not, we need each other to keep remembering, to keep exchanging, to keep that alive so that we can be in better service to all that's unfolding with technology. So that's now more than ever in all aspects, the communities, the professional communities between different areas of interest. And there is a rise of that. I'm seeing so many communities happening, but we're still in the early days of what that actually means. What is the governance around a community? How deep does the community go? Because there are some communities that have a shared value system that's inherently quite surface, or even in inner development communities that can bypass the actual real development that needs to happen on the inside. And then there are communities that really are in the grind, doing the real thing. They're even learning how to live together, how to grow food together, how to educate their children together. There's also that too. So there's different levels of community, but absolutely more than ever necessary. Yeah, for this very uncertain world that we're in.
I totally resonate with that. Community is so important right now. Amanda, I would ask you, what is next for you? What is emerging through you? And where can people find you online? Is there anything else we haven't asked that you would like to say?
What's next for me? In the very immediate term, I will share in my pursuit of honoring diverse perspectives and how we see the world through different knowledge systems. I've been integrating contemplative practice, Eastern-based traditions in different regenerative systems, in leadership. And I'm going to pay a visit to India to meet the Dalai Lama, the leader of Tibetan Buddhism, to learn how the Tibetans see the world. I've drawn so much wisdom and inspiration from the forest and from my indigenous friends in South America. And I feel that the East has a lot of knowledge and care and connection to nature that I have yet to discover. So what's next for me is to keep cultivating that curiosity to understand and continuing it with some projects. So I'm working on a project with a Brazilian friend of mine, a cool Brazilian woman. We're developing a global oracle of words that supports regeneration. So we're amassing voices of people from different industries who have words that have been very powerful for them that they want to share, and to create our own form of intuition and knowing and conversation through an oracle deck, which is something that has been used from back until the oracles of Delphi, let's say, could be the origins in ancient Greece, to this divination, but to kind of bring it to a professional contemporary context that still brings ritual, but in a more accessible way. So I have this sort of words project because language and words have been very important on my journey. And to follow along a bit more of what I'm doing in general, they can find me on my website, amandaefthimiou.com. If you can spell my last name, it's quite easy to find. And I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and I'm very happy to talk to anyone who wants to jam on any of the things that I've spoken about around integration, regeneration, traditional knowledge systems, somatic intelligence, all of these wonderful things that the world needs more and more of.
Thank you, Amanda. This has been a wonderful, lovely conversation. I really loved all the depth and the diversity of all the topics that you bring together into 1 hour. And remind me, I need to connect you to Thomas Mansfield. You know Tom?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, he's actually working with regeneration and literature and a lot of words. He's actually one of our next people in the podcast.
He's great.
So I wanted to ask you as a last question, if there's one seed that you could plant into this world, what would it be?
Yeah, I would love to plant the seed of courage into this world. More courage for people to feel safe and have permission to take authorship and ownership of their lives, of their words, of their truth. With a lot of uncertainty, literally so much happening right now that can be quite challenging for most to bear witness to. The war, grief, everything, economic collapse, political unrest. We need to have a lot of courage, to show a lot of bravery, to make sense of these trying times. And courage also for me implies that it's not the absence of fear. Courage for me is not the absence of fear. Courage is the willingness to do something despite all that might be coming, because it's in integrity with one's heart and one's truth. If we all did that, the world can be a very special place. And so that is my seed.
Beautiful. Thank you, Amanda, for spending this hour with us. And Alex, I leave the last word to you.
No, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and so good to meet you and get to know you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.